Chapter 3. An Uninvited Guest. I turned the corner and started towards the precinct. A paperboy was hawking the latest afternoon edition. Dock strike, bad unemployment, and SF private investigator found dead in Sacramento. My blood ran cold. I had a feeling I was about to walk straight into the gates of hell. I half expected the motto above the police station door to read, "Abandon all hope, ye who enter here." Running was not an option. The best I could hope for is that either the lieutenant wasn't here, or I had an ironclad alibi. Two things struck me when I entered the precinct. Every desk sergeant in the country looks the same, and when you don't want to find a cop, you will. I identified myself to the desk sergeant, who was expecting me, and he picked up the phone and got Lieutenant Sanders for me. Moments later, the lieutenant arrived. "Hello, Lieutenant. I brought the papers." "I'm glad you did. Why don't you come into my office and we'll have a little talk," he said. The good news was he didn't say I was under arrest. The bad news, I was still waiting for that one. We really did go to the lieutenant's office. I had half expected him to haul me into a small room with a single light and a big goon who would do the persuading for me to answer questions the way they wanted me to. "Sit down, Watcher. We need to talk," he said. I sat. So did he. I held out the forms. "You still want these?" I asked. "As a matter of fact, I do." He briefly read through them. His face took on an air of surprise. "This is pretty thorough. We don't usually get this much information. You really were an MP in the Army?" I nodded. "If this checks out, you still want the license?" "More than you can know," I replied. "I take it the kid hawking papers outside was talking about Mickey Phillips." He was. "Any idea what happened?" The kid yelled, "Murdered." "Any idea who did it?" The lieutenant pushed back in his chair and eyed me slowly. He was sizing me up. I just wasn't sure if it was for a noose or not. "Not my case. It happened in Sacramento, and they made it clear they didn't want me butting in." "Lieutenant, give me something here. I have had a pretty crazy 12 hours, and I got a feeling it's going to get stranger before it straightens out." "I know two things," he said. "He was killed with a .38, and you didn't kill him, at least not directly." "And how do you know the second part?" "You got an ironclad alibi. When Mickey Phillips was being shot down, I was banging on his office door, and you answered it." "It hit the papers that fast?" I asked. "It's an extra, the morning edition with a new headline." Now it was my turn to push back in my chair. The lieutenant knew I didn't do it, and I'm pretty sure he knows I didn't have it done, no motive. So what did the lieutenant want? "So, Lieutenant, what's in the wind that you are not telling me?" "William Mason," he said. "Oops," I replied. "You knew about him?" he asked. "Someone thought I might be him." I cocked my head to one side and stared at the lieutenant for a moment or two. I don't know whether Mrs. Stanton was playing me or not, but the lieutenant had been, to some degree. I needed information, and he wanted something. It was time for us to deal. I indicated he start. "Mickey never said anything about a Navy Colt 44, he said. I lied. The paperwork was for William Mason, but his information wasn't included because I didn't have any. And I sure as hell wasn't going to fill in any blanks for him, not knowing who he was. I decided to make like the forms were for an unknown. Since they weren't filled out, it was easy to do. Didn't know who you were, but you had Mickey's keys, and you didn't appear to be hiding anything obvious. But when you mentioned the gun, I decided to throw you off a bit. I was pretty sure you weren't carrying it, and as I said, that baby packs a big punch, so I wanted to know where it was. Also, I need to know more about you. Mickey didn't hand keys to just anyone, so that was in your favor. Your answers were just straight and vague enough that I had no cause to run you in, but something wasn't right, so I figured I'd see what you were up to." "I don't know who actually gave me the keys," I said. "They came as part of a package that deposited me into the bay." He looked at me oddly. I wasn't going to give him the whole story, just enough to be straight with him. I explained about finding the keys, the gun, and the clothes in the bag. I didn't tell him about it being a running bag, or the passport, or the money. I didn't want him to get self-righteous on me and tell me to return it. I wrapped up telling him I flopped at the office. I got some food, checked out the address. It was clean and dry, and I needed a place to stay. I hoped I could talk myself out of any trouble if someone showed up. The lieutenant started chuckling and shook his head. That's the damnedest story I've heard all year. It's got to be true. He held up the forms I filled out. If this is straight, and you would be stupid to give me something that wasn't, you can still have the license if you want it. But we weren't done. The fickle bitch hadn't put in her 2 cents worth, and I was waiting for her surprise. The lieutenant didn't take long in delivering it. I don't like being frozen out of a case that I know is going to come back to San Francisco, even though it started in the state capital. That's what's happening here. Mickey Phillips wasn't the best buddy, but he was a straight Seamus, and we helped each other out now and again. Until something brings his murder into my jurisdiction, I can't do dick. I got superiors to report to. You, on the other hand, are a private tech, and you have free rein. I can provide you information. You can do the legwork. Bring this case to San Francisco so I can get on board officially. What about William Mason? Why not contact him, I asked. He is in the wind. As far as I know, he's a ghost. Besides, he hasn't filed any forms to be a PI, and you have. If he shows up, I'll deal with him then. He may even be part of all this. We talked a bit more, and now I had a firmer handle on it. Who am I kidding? This was all still an illusion. But I wasn't alone. Phillips being dead only bought me an ally for as long as it didn't look like I had him killed. I had to get back to the office and dig through Phillips' files. Lieutenant Sanders had me wait for a bit while he got me a temporary PI license. The real one would show up in the discreet inquiries office in a couple of weeks. When he came back, he had a temporary gun permit too. You'll have to bring the gun in for the boys to run a ballistics on it. Relax, there isn't anything outstanding on a Navy Colt 44, so you should be in the clear for now, he said. We had an understanding. He would meet me later in the office and go over what I had learned after I had done a little sleuthing. That was a laugh, but the best place for me to go was back to the office and dig into Mickey Phillips' files. I decided to begin with Mrs. Stanton's case. After all, that one had a $2,000 paycheck tied to it. I grabbed a sandwich and a Coke from the diner and headed up in the elevator to the 4th floor. The doors opened, and it seemed too quiet for me. I stepped out slowly, and a man was coming from the direction of the office. Collar pulled up, hat pulled down. He didn't want to be recognized. As we passed and he stepped into the elevator, the waft of cologne that hit me was overwhelming. I might not be able to identify him in a lineup, but I would be able to smell him coming from 2 blocks away. I walked past the office like I was going somewhere else until the elevator door closed. Then I made a dash at the door of the office. Someone had tried to jimmy the lock. There were a couple of doors between me and the Colt, and I wanted that gun loaded and in my hand in case my nose started screaming again. I didn't fumble the keys, and I slid through the door, planted my sandwich and Coke on the receptionist's desk, grabbed a chair, jammed it into the door very quickly. Then I set the lock. I was at the desk in the inner office, bag open, gun out, loaded, and then I just sat there for a couple of seconds remembering to breathe. I don't know which I noticed first, the sound at the door or the pungent smell of my visitor. I stood up and decided to see what he wanted, but the breaking glass and the fumbling of the door and chair gave me cause to wait before I offered an invitation. Miserable Seamus trick, I heard him say. Then he busted through the door. He raised up a snub-nosed .38 in my direction. It was the last thing he did. When adrenaline hits, everything goes in slow motion. I already had the Colt in position. I cocked the hammer and pulled the trigger twice. I didn't really see the bullets leave the barrel and travel the 12 feet to their destination, but I did see each one hit its target. Although he had busted the door in, he hadn't really gotten through it. His single shot went down and wide as he was knocked back by the impact of the 44 slugs. I suppose I heard each projectile as it thumped into his chest. I saw what seemed like dust jump from his coat. The look of surprise on his face told me he didn't expect me or whoever was here to be armed. By the time he hit the wall on the other side of the hall, he was dead. He slowly collapsed, sliding along the wall, leaving a blood trail down to the floor. I walked to the door and slowly looked around. Nobody came out into the hall to see what happened. Curiosity killed the cat. I guess they figured they'd find out what was going on when the police arrived. I backed into the office towards the receptionist's desk, just in case there was more than one visitor wanting to see me. I picked the receiver up and dialed the precinct. Lieutenant Sanders, please. I had put the gun down on the inner office desk and waited there. I kept an eye on the inner office door and the door to the hallway. Somewhere in the background, I swear I could hear a woman laughing.